In my vlog on Shropshire Folklore of Mary Webb, I mentioned that Mary was heavily influenced by Charlotte Burne, and a jointly authored book, Shropshire Folklore, A Sheaf of Gleanings. I actually find that A Sheaf of Gleanings is ready available both from booksellers and online. So I've decided to begin a series based from the large and detailed book. Where I can, I'll augment it with additional materials. I think I also need to apologise that it'll mostly use still photography that I can find on the internet. As from Indonesia, I cannot find relevant video clips, and I'm most unlikely to return to the UK again. Charlotte Sophie Burne, or Lottie, 1850 to 1823. Charlotte was actually born just over the border in Staffordshire at Morton Vicarage. It's said that she inherited her interest in folklore from her mother, also called Charlotte Burne, but this time Charlotte Anna Burne, 1820 to 1893. Charlotte's father, Sambrook Thomas Higgins Burne, 1822 to 1861, was born into a wealthy Staffordshire family. He matriculated at Trinity College, Oxford, in 1841, but did not take a degree. But it would seem that he was disinherited by his father. He was assisted by his brother, the Reverend Thomas Burne, whom was the perpetual curate of Morton in Staffordshire. However, the family moved to Summerhill, Edgemond in Shropshire in 1854, having exhausted their welcome at the Morton Vicarage. And Lottie seems to make a big point of this, that she's finally living in Shropshire. But the truth is, all of these spaces I speak of are just running along the border of Shropshire and Staffordshire. They're very similar places, to be honest. Now, her father's said to have taken to shooting, hunting and drinking. In 1857 he was twice thrown from his horse, and as events surrounding it were somewhat taboo, it's fair to assume that he was drunk, but this led to his premature death in 1861. Lottie suffered a serious illness during her early years. Conditions of ill health and obesity would impede her physical well-being throughout her life. In 1875, Burne became friendly with Georgina Frederick Jackson, who was collecting material for a Shropshire workbook, 1879, and its companion work with the provisional title of Folklore Gleanings. Jackson's demise led Burne to take over her material, adding her own collection of tales to produce Shropshire Folklore, A Sheaf of Gleanings. This probably explains the claim that the book was jointly authored. In the 1890s, she resided at Pyebirch, Eccleshall, again in Staffordshire, where she collaborated with the local folklorist and folk song collector Miss Alice Annie Keary of Stoke-on-Trent. Together they spent 3 years, around 1890 to 93, collecting material locally in North Staffordshire. While a number of joint papers were published, Burne moved to Cheltenham somewhere around 1894, and the project failed to be realised in a book form. She became the first female president of the Folklore Society, 1909 to 1911, and indeed was active in the Folklore Society for some 40 years. Mere and pool are often used interchangeably in Shropshire. Strictly speaking, a mere is formed by glacial melt, often called kettle holes, and is most common in North Shropshire. I've already talked about Bomere Pool, which of course is a tautology because it's saying Bopool Pool, in my vlog on the Bloody Hand and Wild Eadric, and do not propose to repeat it. albeit that Bomere Pool is very well known to me and very close to my heart. Colemere, one of Ellesmere meres, also has a legend that church bells may be heard ringing at the bottom. In each case, a chapel is said to have stood on the banks of the water, to have been pulled down and the bells thrown into the mere. At Colemere they may be heard on windy nights, when the moon is full. According to another, at midnight on the anniversary of the patron saint of the chapel, supposedly at St. Helen. Alternatively, a monastery once stood there on the ground occupied by the pool, but the spring burst forth close to it and swelled to such a height that the waters quickly covered the monastery, forming Colemere, beneath which the chapel bells may yet be yearly heard ringing. Another variant is that the old church at Colemere was pulled down by Oliver Cromwell, and the bells thrown into the mere. On one attempt to get them up, chains were fastened to them, and 20 oxen had succeeded in drawing them to the side. But the bells rolled back into the water. They heard the sound and saw the bubbles where they settled, but they could not be seen any more, nor has anything been seen or heard of them ever since. Ellesmere, and in particular the mere at Ellesmere, is the subject of many legends. Or rather, they're probably all variants of the same legend, all bearing the same notion of wickedness, punished by a flood. Where Ellesmere stands was once a fine stretch of meadowland, as any in the county. In a large field there was a beautiful well from which everyone in the neighbourhood used. Then there was a change of tenants in the farm to which the field belonged. The newcomer was a churlish man who said that visitors trampled down his grass. So he stopped the poor people coming to the well, with no one allowed to draw the water there beside his own family. But needless to say, no good came of it. One morning, very soon after the people had been forbidden to come, the farmer's wife went down to the well for water, but instead of a well she found the whole field was one great pool, and so it has remained ever since. The farmer and all of his family who held the field after him were obliged to pay the same rent as before, as punishment for such unneighbourly conduct. An alternative version is that when clean water was very scarce in this neighbourhood, all that could be got was fetched from a beautiful well in the very middle of what is now known as the mere at Ellesmere. But the people for whom the land belonged were so grasping that they charged a halfpenny for every bucket that was drawn, and then they prayed so they prayed to heaven to take some notice of their wrongs. So the Almighty, to punish those who oppressed the poor, caused the well to burst forth in such volumes that it flooded all the land about, and so formed the mere. Thenceforth there was plenty of water free for all. Or that the water of the Silvermere was once all dry ground, a cottage with a garden fence which hedged all around, and there resided alone an aged lady, oft many called her a witch, and that her home had a well nearby, whose water was so bright and clear. And many would seek it, but greatly it displeased the witch to see all her neighbours came, and often she was heard to say that they came another day she would the well refuse. Arguments ensued, and eventually the well was safely locked with bolts and bars to prevent the water going, preventing the spring from running. And all that day none could be drawn. The water rose full 2 feet more, and then when the evening shadows fell, beneath the cover of the well the stream was running down. It flowed on gently all the next day, and soon the well lay there, a pond of clear water, as if it ever gathered strength. It deeper grew until at length the pond became a mere. This caused those who lived nearby to lose their homes. There is a connection to this story of the island in Ellesmere, but I can't quite work that one out. An old woman named Mrs. Ellis had a pump in her yard. She would not sell or give any water to her neighbours. One night the well overflowed, and the next morning nothing was to be seen of either her or the pump, which is why it's called after her, and therefore Ellesmere. Ellesmere abounded with fish when all were allowed to fish in it. But when men were prevented from fishing it, few or no fish are found in it. In the same region is Newton Mere. If a person is sailing over it and calls out, "Proud Newton Mere," or "Alethop Cuntherfere," a storm arises at once and swamps his boat. The words convey an insult, as if it were to say to the lake, "Thou art Newton Mere," i.e. Newton's Mere. Burne Pool near Church lies at the foot of Burne Hill, an entrenchment camp on an eminence in the mist, where it was once intended to build a parish church. But the same mysterious something which interfered with the building on the height also threw the bells intended into the Burne Pool. Horses were brought and fastened to them, but they were quite powerless to draw them out. Then oxen were tied with better success. But just as the bells were coming to the surface of the water, they fell again, and they lie at the bottom of the pool to this day. Between Oswestry and Llanymonic, close beside the railway line, lies a pretty little pool known as Thuchlas, or Llinachlis, which is interpreted to mean swallowed hall, or the lake of the enclosure. When the water was clear enough, the towers of a palace might be discerned at the bottom. Unfortunately, they have never appeared to have been a day when the water was clear enough. Another story is that it was drowned when the local refused to listen to the missionaries San Germanus of Auxerre, or that the Knockless family were renowned for riotous living and their feasts. A voice was often heard saying, "Vengeance is coming," but no one took any notice and they carried on partying. However, one day one of the maids of the household asks when the vengeance was coming, and the reply was that it would come in the 6th generation, and the voice was heard no more. When the 6th heir from the time of that warning was given was having a feast, and music was playing and wine was flowing, one of the harpists went outside for some fresh air. When he turned back to re-enter the place, he found that it had disappeared. All that could be heard and be seen was a harp floating on the waters of the lake, which now has covered the palace and all the revellers. And many of the meres and pools are said to have no bottom. Kettlemere and Blackmere in Ellesmere are two such ones. Knockless Pool itself is said to have no bottom. 3 cart ropes will not reach the bottom of the Burne Pool. Many have tried to fathom the depth of Bomere, but in vain. Though wagon ropes were tied together and let down into it, no bottom could be found, nor can it be drained. The attempt was once made and found useless. Whatever the workman did in the day was undone by some mysterious power at night. The White Lady of Longner is in a habit of coming out of the Black Pool besides the road to the Botwood. That's quite interesting, because you've possibly heard me say about how many grey ladies there are in Shropshire, but this is a white lady. The pool is also bottomless. The parson's children had been so foolhardy as to skate on it during the winters. The White Lady issues out at night and wanders along the roads. Parson Hughes of Longner met her once as he was going over the narrow footbridge beside the ford over the Cund Brook. It actually says it's the Longner Brook, but I'm certain they mean the Cund Brook. Believing her to be a nice young wench, he was a young fellow and waited for her to come close. In the middle of the bridge, he clasped her in his arms, but there was nothing there. There was a great party held in the garden of the villa. Now again, I can't find the villa, but there is along the hall, which it could be. The fiddler played, and they were all dancing. The white lady joined in the dancing. She danced and danced round in the ring. At last she disappeared all of a sudden, and then they realised who she was. Now, of course, Longner and the Botwood are places that I know very well, but I've got to say I cannot think of any of the places that they've mentioned, apart from, of course, the Cun Brook, which they called Longner Brook. And it does have many meanders, and it does run along the road to Botwood. And there are a few lakes nearby the brook. Having talked about the grey ladies, the white lady is actually a traditional name for fairies, and this dancing legend, of course, is very common across all of Northern Europe. There's also a white lady of Kilsall who haunts the dark walk beside the pool in the grounds of that old-fashioned mansion, and it's said to be the ghost of the Whiston family, who were owners of Kilsall near Old Brighton in the time of Elizabeth I. And then there is the Lady or Ladies' Walk at Ellesmere. This is a paved causeway running far into the mere. It could be traced by bathers until they got out of their depth. How much further it might run, they of course don't really know. Although in 1879 some divers searching for the body of a drowned man came upon it at the bottom of the mere. Now at Child's Arkle there is actually a story of a mermaid. She emerged from a pool and enchanted two men as she spoke to them, explaining that there was treasure at the bottom of the pool. They followed her to the pool where she dived and brought up a huge lump of gold. But she dived back into the pool with the gold, never to be seen again. The Ashrai is a type of aquatic fairy in English folklore and literature. They're usually depicted as female, live in lakes, and are similar to mermaids and nixies. Cheshire and Shropshire stories tell of fishermen who captured Ashrai and put them in their boats. It seemed to plead for freedom in an unknown language, and when the fisherman bound it in the touch of the cold wet hands, burned his skin like fire, leaving a permanent mark. He covered the Ashrai with wet weeds, and it continued to protest, its voice getting fainter and fainter. By the time the fisherman reached the shore, the Ashrai had melted away, leaving nothing but a puddle of water in the boat. For the Ashrai perish if directly exposed long to the sun. They are sometimes described as timid and shy, standing about 2 to 4 feet tall, or 0.61 to 1.22 metres, and may be depicted as tall and lithe. In some retellings the Ashrai has green hair and a fishtail instead of legs, or webbed feet instead. In common with northwest England, there's a tradition of Jenny Greenteeth, the name of a water witch who has none of the outward charms of the mermaids or Ashrai. She's an old woman who lurks beneath the green weeds which cover stagnant ponds. Ellesmere children are warned that if they venture too near the edge of a mere, she will stretch out her long arms and drag them in with her. I recall as a child Jenny Greenteeth was enlisted in health campaigns, warning us as children to regularly brush our teeth. And many of these stories are common across northern England and reflect older beliefs of gods living within bodies of water. And this is something that I am all too familiar with in Java, but we see them as spirits rather than gods.